Welcome to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, a leadership conversation for those not in the driver's seat of their organizations. You can learn by visiting www.backseatleader.com. And now, here are the hosts of the Backseat Leadership Podcast, Geoff and Brad Merchant.
Welcome to another episode of the Backseat Leadership Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brad Merchant, here with my co-host.
I'm Geoff Kokenauer.
Good job, Geoff. You hit it right on cue that time. That's awesome. And man, today we're really excited that you're tuning in with us to talk about topics that are related to backseat leadership, those who are serving in their organizations who aren't at the top of the org chart, but this is a podcast for everyone else, and that includes us, Geoff. And today we're talking about a topic that I hate to exaggerate things, but I do it a lot. I hate to exaggerate this, but today's topic, I think, is vital for backseat leadership. In fact, I would go as far to say, if you cannot do what we are going to talk about today well as a backseat leader, you are failing. You will never be able to use your influence well across organizational lines or even outside of an organization, because you won't know how to navigate real life with real people. And that's what we're talking about, navigating real life with real people. And Geoff, I'm really excited that you're going to lead us through this content. So could you kick us off? What are we talking about that's really vital for backseat leaders?
Yeah, well, Brad, when we talk about backseat leaders and you say vital things, by the way, I appreciate you not super hyping this one up.
This is going to be the greatest podcast episode of podcast episodes ever.
Had to open my mouth. But what we're talking about today is, the reality that we serve, all of us, in some capacity on a team. Whether it's or we serve with people who are on, whether we're in an organization of 3 people or 300 people. Yep. We serve in situations where we're on, in some level of an organizational chart, right? Where maybe we have multiple tiers, we have dotted lines, all those type of things, but we serve with people on the same level most times. Or we serve with people who we're working with that need to be in community with each other, right? And ourselves included in that. And of course, Brad, if you've been on a team of any sort, if you've been working with people who are on the same level as you, there is a whole slew of things that come with that relationship, with that conversation. And what I find when we talk about leading sideways, so if you're in the back seat and you're leading sideways, what I find, talking with different people who are, in backseat leadership roles, is that there are a number of conversations, there's a number of issues that can come up, tensions, those type of things, that can really either they can propel us forward, or they can thwart our efforts to move forward. One of the things that I absolutely love to try and create is synergy. Synergy is collectively moving in the same direction, my definition. Yep. So whether you're coming from, in our organization, a worship angle or a discipleship angle or a student ministry angle, working together towards this one ultimate goal, often set by the front seat leader. But there's a number of things that can come in and thwart those efforts to move in the same direction. Yep. One of the things that we talk about in different contexts is that everybody has influence. Everybody has influence. And whether you're influencing people around you, next to you, and beside you, those are 3 ways to say the same thing. That's awesome. Whether you're influencing people, or you will influence people either positively or negatively, no matter where you're at on the organizational chart, whether you're influencing people above you, below you, or sideways. And so as we talk about leading sideways, I want to give you three things that I've seen be positive, influential things for the people working in backseat leadership roles, things that I've been able to accomplish or at least employ in my role. But also, honestly, Brad, there's a part of this is a conversation, because I don't know that anybody knows how to do this extremely well. Sure. And I would also argue pretty vehemently, is that a way? Pretty loudly. How this works and how this fleshes out is very, very specific to your situation, your organization, the things that you do.
Has to be contextualized.
It really does. And so, that's something that in a podcast we can't really bring to the table. But I want to give you three perspectives or 3 principles that hopefully will help our listeners consider what it looks like to lead sideways and to lead and use their influence in a positive manner. One of the things that happens whether you're hired into an organization that already has an existing team or you get developed into a team is you don't always get to pick who that teammate's going to be. Maybe you might be involved in the hiring process. You might be helped, part of the selection process, but you don't always get to say, that's the person I want to work with, and that's the person, and that's the person. So you don't get to always pick your team. Oftentimes, that's the front seat leader's role. And so what happens is that you get a group of people together. It's like group work in high school and middle school, and you get put into a group, and when you're in high school and middle school, you're not really thinking about, gee, I wonder how we're supposed to do this best. You're simply thinking about, how do I get an A? Well, in the same way, when you get to the working world, when you get to adult life, like there's this level to where the different personalities that sit around a team or on the same level of the organization have to work together, and primary to that cause is working to benefit whatever the front seat leader is trying to accomplish as well. Now, one of the things that can happen is that in that effort, you can have different personalities, you can have different things going on, and what begins to happen is by just charging forward, especially if you're unhealthy, you're unemotionally intelligent, emotionally unintelligent, or emotionally unaware, you can begin to simply focus on the things that you're good at and the things that the people around you are not good at. And it's almost as if you begin to critique the lack of success of your team or the people who you're working with on not your weaknesses and not their strengths, but on your strengths and their weaknesses. And so it's really easy to start critiquing the people who are around you. And when you do that, man, nobody wants to hear how they're not doing well. And nobody wants to hear how they're not meeting the mark, especially if the mark is being set by someone who's on the same level as them or someone who's supposed to be working with them. And so principle number one is simply this, is to value your peers by seeing their strengths and their complement to your weaknesses. Value your peers by seeing their strengths and their complement to your weaknesses. Everybody's got strengths. Everybody's got weaknesses. You got to put it on a job application when you apply. You got to talk about it in interviews. But the reality is that oftentimes when we're on teams and we're trying to lead sideways, we don't necessarily start to think about, gee, I wonder how these things are supposed to work together. When you get to select those things, when you get to staff for your position, staff, people who are going to assist you or going to work under you or whatever it is, you get to look at your strengths and you get to say, well, this person's strengths will complement my weaknesses. When you're just on the same level and you get put on a team, oftentimes that's not our first reaction. Our first reaction is to, okay, how are they hurting how I'm getting stuff done, or how are they helping me? But what I think, what I've seen great leaders do is to value how those people who are next to them complement each other. So not only how do they help me, that's a pretty obvious question to this one, but how am I adding value to them? Like how is my strengths complementing their weaknesses? And when that happens, when you start to have that perspective, your mindset, your philosophy, your view of the situation and how things are going sideways has more potential to positively influence the people around you, because you actually see how you could influence them and how they could influence you.
Sure. Yeah, Geoff, and I think what we do naturally, and this bad leaders do this consistently, but I think we all do it naturally, is what we tend to do when we work with someone. So we're working with another backseat leader, we're in a peer relationship, and we're working on something together. What we tend to do on a team is we exaggerate their weaknesses and assume their strengths. So we actually look and we say, hey, here are all the faults and the cracks in this person's productivity, their leadership, and even their own character. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we assume their strengths. So maybe there's the things that they're really good at, we're like, yeah, they're good at that. But then we really hone in and we take like a magnifying glass and we zoom in on their weaknesses. And when we do that, personally speaking, when I've tended to do that, we become cynical. We actually don't work well with these people because we actually feel like we're competing with them, or as you said, they're an obstacle to us achieving some stated goal. And I think what you're saying is really, really helpful. We want to reverse that, don't we? We want to exaggerate their strengths. We want to celebrate those.
Yeah.
And we want to assume their weaknesses. We want to assume everybody has cracks in their leadership and in their character, don't we? We all have things that are difficult. Jeff, you and I, we both have things together, even in our friendship, that I do things that just drive you nuts, and you do things that drive me nuts.
Wait,
and yet...
list those out for me.
We'll do that. We don't have enough time in this episode to do that. If our podcast was 3 hours long, we might be able to do that. But, Jeff, you know what we do? We celebrate the good in one another, and we assume we have weaknesses. We're going to help one another in that and confront one another from time to time, but I think that's good leadership, that when you're working with someone in a backseat leadership role, that you are actually able to hone in on their strengths and say, hey, these are awesome things about you. I love how you think and view things and do things in this way. But then for weaknesses, we assume them, and we don't chastise them for them, but we assume that they're there. We assume that they're human, and I think that's really important. So the first principle, Jeff, is value your peers by seeing their strengths and their complement to your weaknesses. What's our second principle?
Yeah, so the second principle is be a champion of forward-moving community. The reality is this. You're going to be in community of some sort, some level, with the people who you work with. It's just, that's a natural thing that human beings do. When they work towards something together, when they work with each other on things, they just develop some level of community. Now, what tends to happen, the danger, the temptation for backseat leaders is to simply rabble-rouse, to stir the pot, to have venting sessions so they don't take out their front seat leader.
Yep.
Go down the list of the excuses that we use for dissenting opinions to be shared. Now, before I go on, those type of things just can be extremely detrimental to the backseat leader. The backseat leadership role is one that is just so unique, but it's not even unique. It's just so contrary to the human drive of success, especially in America, to be successful, to achieve more, to move forward, and to do those type of things. Now, if it's time to move forward, if there's tensions, if there's things, and you need to work with your colleagues on venting or vetting those frustrations and those tensions, that's a thing. But what I'm talking about is, are you a part of a conversation with your community, with your colleagues, that's moving you collectively and you individually and you corporately as a whole forward? It's just not beneficial to regularly get together in your meetings and talk about those who are above you, and just vent and complain and murmur for days, weeks, and months. It's a cancer that festers, and when it reveals its ugly head, it's not beneficial to you, to the people around you, and to the corporation, to the organization. And it happens a lot more than we care to think. And it's actually quite subtle, I think. I think it's the constant venting session that person, that those two people you can go to, and those two people are going to be like, oh yeah, you're right. If they're saying, oh yeah, you're right all of the time, get out. Warning sign. Bells and whistles should be going off in your head. Here's how I think you can tell you're in a forward-moving community with your colleagues. Are they calling you out? Not every time, but are they calling you out when you're wrong? Are they willing to say to you, yeah, but did you think about this? Did you think about how you're doing this? Did you think about how your actions are leading to this? One of the things I think is incredibly important, and we'll talk about, we're going to talk about an episode in the future about when the backseat feels like it's under the bus. Oftentimes what can happen is we feel like we're under the bus, or we feel like the backseat is the worst place possible because everybody who we're talking to is only affirming what we're saying and not trying to challenge some of our perspective, our thinking, and our worldview on the thing. So if I'm in an echo chamber and I constantly hear the same stuff, and it's all negative, and it's all up against, rabble rousing and stirring the pot, I'm going to be in a situation where, of course, those things are going to sound legitimate because we constantly talk about them and we program into our mind. So get yourself and be a champion of forward-moving community, collegial community. How are you all collectively on the same level moving forward, helping your front seat leader move forward? Because the reality is if there's a group venting session happening all the time, chances are there's something that needs to change. Now, whether that's your position or their position, the reality is that if you're not actually challenged, here's how it should work. Let's say you and I get together. I got this issue with my boss, and you know it, and we talked about it a couple times. If you've talked about it a couple times and there hasn't been a question of, are you going to go talk to that person? Have you talked to that person? Have you actually addressed the issue? If that hasn't happened, you are in a toxic and you are championing a toxic community, and it's either time to get out or fizzle that thing out so that you can get yourself in a forward-moving community. It's the only way, I think, to have those venting sessions, which are necessary sometimes, because sometimes you're just wrong, and sometimes you just need to let a release valve out. But if those people around you are not moving you forward or you're not moving them forward, it's not helpful.
Yeah, and I think maybe some of what you're advocating for is just simply put, when you work with other backseat leaders, it's forging friendship. And how do you forge friendship? I remember reading a definition of friendship is a relationship that's forged with truth and trust over time.
That's good.
And I think that's what we're trying to cultivate with one another as we work with other backseat leaders, is we don't want to gossip, we don't want to slander. We want to be charitable with one another, humble with one another. But we also want to forge truth and trust. That there's times we have to confront certain things, but there's other times where maybe we just absorb, right, of whether a backseat leader who's either frustrated about something, and we listen, we take it in, but it's not overtly sinful. It's just a guy who's getting something off his chest, and You're absorbing it as a friend. To me, that's the kind of culture we want to create, of truth and trust, of confrontation and comfort.
That's good.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
So, Geoff, these are two really good principles. First, value your peers by seeing their strengths and complimenting their weaknesses. Secondly, being a champion of forward-moving community. What's our third principle for leading sideways?
Yeah, so this is probably the end-all, be-all. This is probably the thing that if you're going to do anything, this is the thing to do, only because it will help you lead positively sideways, and it's this. Find ways to add value to your teammates. Forget about getting value back. That's what number one is really about. How do we work together? But in your role, no matter where you're at in the organization, find ways to add value to your teammates. The best teammates are the ones who help other teammates get their job done. This could be small. This could be very, very minimal. This could be, hey, I'm just going to simply make sure that this person who I know is going through it right now, and they're having, they're in their busy season. I'm just going to pop in and say, hey, how you doing? Are you being kind to yourself? Are you working? Is there anything I can take off your plate? Any little thing that I can take off your plate? Now you're probably going, well, I don't have any room on my plate. That's fine. But simply checking in, simply being a part of that conversation and seeing how you can add value to that person is going to speak value to them and positively influence people around you.
Totally. Yep. And to me, I think, Geoff, one of the ways you gain influence as a backseat leader is by not just being one of those people who just, hey, I'm going to stay in my lane and you stay in yours. But actually, I want to get in your lane occasionally, and I want to help you swim faster and do things more efficiently and better. And that, I think it's simple things it's as simple as going to someone, hey, how can I help you in this season? But even being willing to be the kind of person that others want to help them, right? To have that kind of persona and aroma about you where, whenever I work with Geoff wants to, he's for me. He's going to be flexible, adaptable, humble, easy to work with. When you reach a crisis, especially as a backseat leader, and you're overwhelmed, those are the people you turn to first. And we want to be that for one another, don't we?
I love what Paul said in Philippians 2 because I think it kind of gives this perspective. He's talking about Jesus. He's talking about Jesus' his personality, his philosophy, and he's trying to relate it to the church in Philippi to give them a character and a perspective on things. He says this. He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or empty pride, but in humility consider others more important than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others." Then he goes on and describes the mind of Christ, which is pretty impressive, and you can look at it yourself in Philippians 2. But I love that because not only, I think it's so easy, especially in the back seat, man. Like you said, I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to get it done. But if the person who's next to you, who's working with you in some capacity, is swimming faster, we are swimming faster. If the person next to you is getting more things done and doing it more efficiently and doing it more successfully, we are operating better. I'll have conversations with people that I just want to see how they're doing. One of the questions I like asking on my teammates is this: what are you doing right now that excites you? And if I can, maybe even, we could do this together, or we could do these things together. You could do that exciting thing. We could do that exciting thing together. Just finding ways to have connected fibers that are positively moving people forward, and not just for your benefit. There's things that I do that nobody else is a part of, and then there's things that I do that other people are part of because we connect fibers together. One of the things that we started doing in our organization was I work with high school students, but we have I have a staff person who's in charge of middle school, I have a staff person who's in charge of elementary, and I have a staff person who's in charge of preschool and then the nursery. And we all got together about 3 years ago and started having this shared experience of a conference. We started doing shared language so that we all started talking about the same things, but we started doing this shared effort. The shared effort was a way to positively influence, remind all of our volunteers from cradle to commencement that they are valued and they're all working together. And so we started doing this thing we call the Next Gen Leader Huddle. We brought all of our leaders together. We gave them dinner. We served dinner. We did something that was funny and usually embarrassing to the staff because that's how we make people laugh. Totally. Detrimental, self-detriment is great. And we would do all these things, and we got to do it together. We worked together. Yeah, were there moments where we were kind of annoyed with each other because different personalities work on timelines and deadlines differently? Sure. But what was beneficial, not only did we get to bless our leaders, that was our intent. We worked together and we got to positively influence each other. And so I think if you can start to find those ways to, how can I benefit? Because our kids ministry was looking for ways to say thanks to our leaders in a situation where we didn't want to do what we always had done. This is a creative new way and we could do it together. And now all of a sudden, we're working together. We're working positively together. We have a level of trust now. We have a level of experience together now. We've challenged each other in meetings before, and we do it quite regularly. And we walk through life together. And I think those type of things can help us move forward when we start to consider how can I add value to my teammates. I
agree. Yeah, and Geoff, to me, this topic is just vital. Because we do it all of the time.
We do.
Sometimes officially. Sometimes we're working on a team with other people. At other times,
And I would argue more times.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe at other times, like the church I work at, we have, like 100 different teams. Mm-hmm. So I'm not working on all of them, obviously, but I'm certainly working with those people.
Right.
That we're working towards the same mission. And how I work with them and how I use my influence with them is vitally important. Absolutely. And so I think these principles are really helpful. Just to review, first, value your peers by seeing their strengths and complimenting their strengths, complimenting your weaknesses. I think that's a really important point we talked quite a bit about. Secondly, be a champion of forward-moving community. And then thirdly, finding value in adding value to your teammates. All of these principles are really, really important, and trust that you've taken something practical and helpful away today. Geoff, anything else you'd add as we close out this episode talking about leading sideways?
I think this is just, again, we talked about this before, but it takes a level of intentionality. And the difference between intentionality and unintentionality is deciding to. So today, decide to do something to add value to your teammates. Do something this week.
Yep. Write something down.
Write something. Send a note. You, Brad, you send notes. You just send notes. Every random time. Every once in a while, I get a random note from you. It's just send a note to somebody this week. Don't do an email. Send a note. Positively tell them how you did something well. Just come alongside what they're doing and see how you can add value to people around you. And I think you're going to influence people sideways better.
Yep, totally. So this has been another episode of the Backseat Leadership Podcast. It's been helpful to talk about such a vital topic.
Hopefully it's been as good as Brad hyped
This
it
has
up.
been the greatest podcast I think I've ever listened to, and I'm a part of it. So this is amazing. What an honor. So thanks for listening to another episode, Jeff.
We'd
Brad,
love to hear from people.
Signing off.
We'd love
to hear from people
at
www.backseatleader.com.
That's right.
You can find us on Twitter, Instagram at Backseat Leader. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to connect with you. Peace.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave a review to help other backseat leaders join the conversation. For more information, visit www.backseatleader.com.